Glad you could be with us this afternoon as CEWP introduces a new type of anti-harassment training that we're calling Respect in the Workplace. The purpose of this new program is to educate company managers and supervisors on basically how to build a more respectful workplace environment. Instead of your traditional compliance training that solely focuses on legal definitions and standards of liability, this program focuses on ways to establish a work culture based on respect. In addition to today's webinar, we've also developed additional videos that you can use to provide respect in the workplace training to all of your company employees. These include a supervisor's role in creating a respectful workplace, which was developed specifically for project supervisors to assist them in managing difficult people, handling employee complaints, and building a workplace environment on a foundation of respect. Workplace bullying, which covers what is workplace bullying, what are the different types of workplace bullies, and the impact workplace bullies have on your jobs. Another short video is giving and getting feedback, which covers why getting feedback is important, how to give feedback, and also how to get feedback. And finally, our fourth video, being an active bystander, which deals with how it is everyone's role to be an active bystander to create a culture of respect. Again, all of these videos, including today's webinar, which is being recorded, along with additional resources, are available on our website at cawprespect.org. Now, let me introduce Fran Sepler of Sepler and Associates. Ms. Sepler is best known for pioneering work in harassment prevention and workplace investigations. She has developed techniques and protocols used by organizations throughout the United States to investigate complaints of workplace misconduct. She has conducted over 1,000 workplace investigations and provided anti-harassment and anti-bullying training for thousands of organizations. So with that, I'll turn the webinar over to you, Fran.
Thanks, Rich, and welcome everyone. I'm glad you're here today for this important topic. Some years ago, about 9 now, I was asked to testify before the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and I was one of several witnesses who told the commission that what was going on in trying to create harassment-free environments wasn't working, that we were telling people what not to do, we were shaming people, we were scaring people, and mostly we were boring people. And the EEOC came back to me and said, okay, build us something different. And I built them a program called Respect in the Workplace with a companion program called Leading for Respect. And what I'm going to cover with you today are the basic fundamental concepts that drove that program's development, that hopefully will orient you to not only the incredible value of building respect in the workplace, but also the behavior between respectful behavior and unlawful behavior that really poses the bulk of problems in American workplaces. You see at the top of my screen the Menti link. If you have a mobile device and you'd like to use that, that will allow you to participate in the interactive components of today's training for a little bit of fun and interest. And again, I'll just reiterate that I'm happy to take questions as we go along in the chat. There also will be time for Q&A at the end. So just to test our Mentimeter technology, this is not relevant to the training, just an opportunity to see how it works. If you're on the Menti site, you should be able to pick one of these. Which superpower would you most want? And I'll give it just a moment to let you all engage with the interface. And invisibility is winning slightly over flight here. And now it's a tie. And I'm going to give it about 30 more seconds. So those of you who can find your way in, we've got someone who wants to be immortal. I'm always surprised that one isn't more popular. All right. And 5 more seconds. and it is invisibility for the win today. So hopefully now you've gotten a feel for how the interface on Mentimeter works, and we'll be using that for some more substantive slides later in the program. So this is the way I begin all of my training. And I do this because I think it's important that we all recognize at a visceral level the impact that a good or a bad workplace can have on our lives. And what I'll ask you to do is to think about a time you were away from work, maybe something as simple as a weekend when you were able to actually go a day without working. Or maybe you've been lucky enough to take a vacation where you were able to unplug for several days. And thinking about that, we all know that there's a reason that that we like weekends and we like vacations, because we're on our own dime, we're making our own choices, we're pursuing activities that hopefully are enriching to us, we're spending time with friends and family, we're getting things done, and we're not following anybody else's playbook except maybe the rest of our family or friends. And so there comes a time, whether it's at the end of a 5-day vacation or at the end of a single holiday off, where it's time to return to work. And I ask you to just think about yourself in that moment when it's time to go back to work. And it might be a Sunday night, or if you're like me, if you go on a vacation, I often book like what I call a buffer day, a day to unpack and do laundry before I return to full-time work. And what we know is that when you're returning to work, that you are making several kinds of adjustments. There's actually a change in your physiology between leisure time and work time. You are gearing up to do the kind of work that you are required to do, and that may involve mental preparation. It may actually involve cognitive preparation in terms of reviewing things. But there's also an emotional adjustment, and that's really what I want to focus on. How does it feel going back to work? I mean, nobody's favorite time is Sunday night before a Monday at work, but we know that there are people who have a wide array of responses. So for those of us who happen to work in places where we feel respected and valued, that adjustment may be relatively mild. We're disappointed to end the weekend. We're bracing for whatever stressors are going to come our way, but that adjustment is not all that disruptive for it. Although I know that there's something called the Sunday blues that's supposed to be pretty normal. And then let's also say that there are people who may not be very unhappy or feel that they're treated terribly at work, but who really don't feel as though the workplace is a place where they matter, where they feel where anything good is going to happen. It's just a job they're going to, and they have to be on the lookout for problems, and they're going to keep to themselves and just get through the day. And if they're going to have a job, this is a job. This might as well be this job, but there's really nothing there for them, and they're constantly on caution and trying to stay out of trouble. And for those folks, there's a stress associated with returning to work, and they may start feeling it in the middle of Sunday afternoon that, I got to go back there. This is not going to be very happy for me. And that adjustment is a source of stress. And research has shown that when that adjustment is stressful, that it affects how we show up at work. And then there are the folks who are experiencing behavior at work that is harmful to them, diminishing to them, that causes them fright, that causes them anxiety. Maybe they are being bullied. Maybe they are being harassed. Maybe their perception is that they will never be treated fairly. Maybe they feel as though they are constantly being bombarded with abusive or harmful behavior. And for those folks, that Sunday night is a big deal. I've been a workplace investigator for 30 years, and if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. I start to get a headache at noon on Sunday. I can't be with my friends and family. I start getting depressed. I start getting anxious. I can't sleep on Sunday night. So I know I'm going to show up in the workplace on Monday, ill-prepared for what faces me. And when I get to work, I'm just going to make myself as small as possible so as not to be subjected to any more of that behavior. I'm going to just try to get through the day. And if you think about it, those three folks are showing up very differently at work. And this is one of the things that that we have to understand about workplace mistreatment is it's not just the mistreatment is a problem, but if somebody feels disrespected, bullied, or harassed in the workplace, they're not showing up to do the best job they can. They're showing up with a degree of self-preservation. They're showing up with a degree of fear, and that affects them in very powerful ways. We know that overall organizational performance is affected. We know that safety is affected. We know that interpersonal relations are affected. And so what we want to do is we want to move more people down to that beginning of the spectrum of saying, you know, it's work, it's not as fun as a weekend, it's not going to always be a good time, but it doesn't give rise to feelings of dread or anger or frustration or depression in me. Instead, I'm having the normal, relatively mild adjustment that I should be having. And I'm going to be able then to show up and do my job with my full engagement and not worrying about my safety. So some years ago, when I was trying to talk to employers about respect, I joined forces with some really smart people at a university. And we tried to say, how can we quantify respect? How can we really measure what it is and whether you've got it in your workplace? And these smart people looked at all sorts of engagement surveys and very complex ways of measuring people's attitudes and people's feelings about their workplace. And they realized that we had three basic, what I kind of think they're magic questions. So let me tell you how I used these questions. I went to 40 organizations of all different sizes and in all different industries. And I got their permission to ask these questions of everybody in the organization. We used a simple online interface, and everybody could answer anonymously and quickly. And this was asked from the last hired all the way up to the CEOs of companies. 3 questions, forced choice, yes or no. But before we administered that little survey, we asked each organization to tell us their 5 top line objectives for the year. And depending on the nature of the organization, some of them had deep strategic plans and were able to do that pretty easily. Some were pretty small outfits and had to really work at putting those together, but we had those on file. So we asked these questions, yes or no. And we didn't even do item specific analysis because we wanted this to be easy. We simply counted how many yes answers we got and how many no answers we got. And then we looked at the organization and we told them what their respect index was. At the end of the year, we looked at how those organizations were performing against their stated goals. And those goals could be anything. They could be recruitment and hiring goals. They could be profitability goals. They could be goals about impact. Whatever they were, we asked them to give us a report about how they were doing. And here's what's really interesting. We found a sweet spot. We found that organizations that had 75% or more of the answers to the respect index being yes were almost without exception accomplishing or making substantial progress along their goals. And the further south of 75% we got, the more we found organizations that were not succeeding by their own standards. So if you stop watching this session right now, here's what we need to do as employers and as people responsible for people at work is we need to get people to answer yes to these 3 questions. And we can all ask ourselves, what do I do as a leader, as a supervisor, as somebody who has management responsibilities? What do I do to make sure that every person who works here says, yes, I feel respected? How do I show my employees that I value them? And those 2 separate questions are separate. Does my employer value me as a worker, as a person, as a contributor? And number 3, does my employer value my work? Does my work matter? And so if you just use this as a guide to creating the best possible environment, and you can get 75% or more of your answers to these questions to be yes, you're fueling your organization's success. So then the question arises, when people are asked, do you feel respected? What are they thinking about? And I don't know that it'll be big news to anybody here, but guess what? Putting a poster up that says respect, or giving somebody a coffee cup that says respect, or telling people they need to respect each other doesn't create the yes answer to that. What people respond to are actually small bits of behavior, small cues, small words and actions that they need to experience over and over and over in the workplace to be able to answer the question, yes, I feel respected. Now, what I'd like you to do is think about what those words and actions are. When you think about whether you are respected, what is it you're looking for? What do you think people should be doing and saying, or what do you do and say to demonstrate to people that you respect them? So this is your opportunity to put that into your Mentimeter, and we'll get a little word cloud. Now, wait about 2 to 3 minutes to allow you to put your words in there. Okay, so we have greeting and acknowledging people. Pretty simple, right? Asking for help and offering help. Thank you, and it's partner please. So we know that if you say to somebody, do this, they're going to respond very differently than please do this. Including people, remembering that people are around, including them in conversations. Really, I love that, listening aggressively, listening attentively. And listen, do you see how often that shows up in there? That's always number one that shows up here. The listening to what people have to say, being fully present, asking people their opinions, giving people compliments, letting people finish their sentences without interrupting them, remembering people's names, offering help, validating people, letting them know that what they have to say is worth saying. So this is a great list here, and I see some really, really important ones. And as you see, asking for help, please and thank you, and listening are the ones that are coming up most often. Some of the ones that we sometimes get are simply smiling or making eye contact. And of course, there's some cultural variability there, but we are human beings. We have been given smiles. Us and apes, we're the only species that get to do that. And that's it's a risk reduction shortcut for human beings. If you smile at somebody, they know that you have positive regard for them. And we'll sort of leave out the creepy Stephen King clown kind of smiles, but for the most part, when we greet somebody and we remember their name, when we show interest in somebody and ask them a question, maybe they mentioned last week that they were planning a vacation, and you say, how was that vacation? Or, how was your kid's game? Those are things that let people know that they matter. And I want to tell you that I do this exercise all the time. I've probably done it over 1,000 times. And no matter what industry I'm talking to, no matter what level of people I'm talking to, no matter where in the country I'm talking to, the answers are always the same. This is a universal language that we know about. And there's good reason for this. It actually affects us at a very fundamental level. When we are on the receiving end of these cues, our brain secretes serotonin, and our brain gives us a brief stimulation of our pleasure centers, so that it's below the level where we would consciously experience it, but it actually increases our feelings of warmth. And when we feel warmth, when we're getting these cues from the people around us, we're more likely to reciprocate. And as a result, the climate becomes one where these behaviors are valued, and they have their psychological benefit. So again, simple concept. We ask people to think about how these behaviors and how often they're using these behaviors, and in particular, recognizing that when you have been giving these behaviors and then you withhold them, that's as aggressive as inflicting pain on someone. So that's a little orientation to the powerful ways we can begin to talk about respect in the workplace. What we know are that when people answer yes to our 3 respect index questions, that the rate to which they then subsequently respond to a question, have you observed bullying or harassment in your workplace, it correlates negatively. So the more people say yes, the fewer people say that they've seen bullying and harassment in the workplace, because respectful behavior inoculates the organization against disrespect and bullying. Now, when we've done training traditionally, we've jumped over my 2 middle squares there and have spent a lot of time talking about unlawful harassment. And of course, the lawyers believe that's very important for very good reasons. If we're not training people about how to prevent harassment, we can't defend ourselves if there's subsequently a claim. But I want to suggest to you that we need to spend a lot more time on my little yellow box there, disrespectful, uncivil, or rude behavior. I work with a lot of organizations and encounter a lot of organizations that have what I call a "that's just so-and-so" problem. That's just so-and-so, they're just crabby. That's just so-and-so, they're a difficult person. That's just so-and-so, their bark is worse than their bite. That's just so-and-so, they're never going to change. These are people who are persistently disrespectful, uncivil, or rude. And I want to make a distinction that we're not talking here about you have a bad day and somebody asks you a question, you're not very polite to them. We're all going to be rude on occasion. I'm talking about in organizations where rudeness is persistent and it's not called out. And that's been the American tradition. Well, they're not harming you, just ignore them. Words can't hurt you. But the fact is, there's a lot of research right now that says that this low hum of disrespectful, uncivil, or rude behavior, even when we are in an industry where we believe we've been steeled to disregard it, where it rolls off us, where we're thick-skinned, that even when we believe it's not affecting us, it does affect us. And there are 2 big effects of disrespectful, uncivil, or rude behavior that are well documented across every population, and that is when we're subjected to it, our cognitive ability diminishes and our attention is disrupted. And of course, for folks in your environments, those are both things that jeopardize safety. If people are not being able to pay their full attention, if people are not being able to fully concentrate on the work they're doing, you've got some problems. But here's some studies that may surprise you. At Purdue University, an MRI researcher put people under an MRI, watched their brains when they were exposed to things like somebody rolling their eyes or somebody telling them to shut up. And what they found was that there was a pain response that was quantitatively equal to the pain response of being hit on the finger with a hammer. And just to show that that wasn't outlying research, at UCLA, somebody was studying social ostracism, being left out, being frozen out, and she was looking at pain, and she was working next to people who were in the medical field studying pain, and she realized that the levels of pain that her study subjects were experiencing were just as significant as those who were experiencing chronic medical conditions with pain. And in fact, what that study said is that being subject to exclusion or ostracism or shunning in the workplace will create an amount of pain equal to being punched in the stomach. So if we can elevate our understanding of the importance of stepping in for these little things, not because they violate policies, not because we're going to get sued for rude behavior, but because it undermines a workplace where people can show up and do their job, and it undermines performance, organizational performance, it undermines learning, and it undermines people's willingness to come to you for help when even worse things happen. Because if nobody's stopping the low-level stuff, why would I have faith that the bigger stuff would stop? So rude and disrespectful behavior reduces physical safety, leads to more errors, and it's contagious. So moving along, you'll note the next box was workplace bullying. And workplace bullying is so important a topic that we actually made a separate video that I hope you'll watch about the different forms workplace bullying takes and the powerful corrosive effect it has on workplaces. Now, workplace bullying is not unlawful in any of the 50 states. But what we know is that just because it isn't happening to somebody because they're a member of a protected class, harassment has immense downsides for everything from your employment brand to morale in the workplace to individual and group performance. And it should be addressed with just as much interest and just as much seriousness as workplace harassment. So we're going to cover unlawful harassment because it's important, and I'm assuming that most of the people on this at the session have been exposed to some training. So I'm not going to spend too much time on what the legal definition here is, but remember that unlawful harassment is distinct from workplace bullying only because it is motivated by somebody's identity or it's sexual in nature. So if I treat everybody equally badly, I'm a bully. If I only treat certain classes of people badly based on their race, their sex, their gender, their national origin, their age, then I may be engaged in unlawful harassment. But as we all know, the bar for reaching something that is unlawful is very high. It must be unwelcome and offensive, which means that the person didn't ask for it, the person didn't welcome it. It must be pervasive or severe. In only very few cases would a single incident be actionable under the law, although in some cases it can be bad enough. So it must be a pattern of behavior. There has to be a demonstrated effect on the term and conditions of the employment of the person who was being harassed, meaning they can't come to work, they can't do their job, they were subjected to treatment that deprived them of certain benefits in the workplace. A couple of things I want to remind you about unlawful harassment is that it does not need to be intentional. So I didn't mean it to be that way. They took it wrong. It was just a joke. None of those things in any way detract from a claim of harassment. And there is no requirement. In fact, there's very specifically a prohibition from ever telling the person who feels harassed that they need to tell the harasser to stop. What they need to do is report it through reporting channels or to tell a supervisor or manager. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you what the legal line is, because it is a certainty that by the time actionable harassment has occurred, you've lost the battle. Actionable harassment is usually ongoing or very outrageous behavior. If individuals have been allowed to behave abusively, if rudeness and incivility is pervading the workplace, those are what we call precursors. Those are predictors that you're going to have a harassment problem. And if our only bar is, does it violate the law? We're going to let a lot of terrible things happen in our workplaces. And so we need to set the battle low. My advice to you is that every supervisor in every workplace should know that it is their responsibility to address unprofessional, disruptive, bantering, or rude behavior as inconsistent with expectations. We don't need supervisors saying, well, is this harassment? Do I need to address it? If it's not professional, if it's causing other people to be disrupted, if there's banter, which is a very quick slide into potential sexual or racial harassment, or just plain rudeness, those are the things that need to be addressed. So when communicating with employees, I find that there's a lot of myths and misunderstandings about unlawful harassment or harassment generally. There's been a huge emphasis on sexual harassment, and I'm not suggesting that we should de-emphasize it. It remains a serious problem in the American workplace. But when we look at the numbers of charges filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, we see that there are increasing harassment on the basis of race and religion. There is harassment based on people's age. There's certainly an increase in harassment based on people's gender identity and expression. And the myth that folks have is that, we're only talking about sex and race, and it's important that they understand that's not the case. As I mentioned already, we really need to be clear to people that if they feel harassed, they don't need to object directly. However, we always tell them that if it's possible to do so, they can. One of the videos in this series is on giving and getting feedback. And I built that because when I go and I investigate harassment and I talk to someone who's accused of harassment, the first thing they'll say is, well, why didn't they tell me? Or they never said anything. Or if they had said something, I would have stopped. Now, whether or not that's actually true remains to be seen. But it's certainly worth it. And in fact, if people become a little bit skilled in providing feedback, and also people get a little skilled in accepting feedback that maybe they don't like, we end up having what's called a feedback-rich environment in which people can mention, hey, knock that off when little things happen, and learn that they'll be listened to and complied with, and they'll feel comfortable doing that in the future. Nevertheless, there is no requirement that that happen. Another myth to debunk is that the behavior has to be explicit. It has to be a racial slur, or it has to be an insult based on somebody's religion or nationality. And the fact is that generalized hostility towards individuals or groups based on their identity can be actionable. So if I'm a supervisor and I treat all of my female employees extremely well, and I'm more abusive towards my male employees, there's nothing explicit there. I'm not insulting males, but that can be a hostile environment based on gender. And it is important that both supervisors, managers, and employees understand this. Another myth that employees have is that they can come to a supervisor or to HR or to an EEOC officer and to say, I want to tell you about something, but I don't want you to do anything about it. What we know, of course, is that when an employee says that, it places the organization on notice, and the organization is obligated to address the conduct, whether or not the employee wants them to. In our supervisors module, we do have a piece on what to do when somebody says that, what to do when an employee says, I want to talk to you, I don't want you to do anything, and a little bit of discussion about why they're doing that. What we know is that the sooner we can get employees to raise issues by saying, stuff like this isn't going to go away by itself, and it's going to get harder and harder, so I hope you'll tell me. When we get those, we get it at the earliest possible moment, and we're far more inclined to be able to solve it. And then finally, just a moment about retaliation. Retaliation is real. Over 50% of the EEOC's complaints for calendar year 2022 were not harassment or discrimination, they were retaliation. And retaliation protection is very important to understand, because it is not just the person who's brought the complaint, but anybody who stood up for them, anyone who acted as a bystander for them, anyone who attempted to stop harassment of other people. And retaliation includes far more than firing somebody or demoting them. It can include unwarranted changes in assignments. It can include greater scrutiny than others on performance. It can include even punishing somebody's spouse who is also an employee. So here I just have some examples of unlawful harassment, of things we're seeing most often. There's a lot of incivility going on in today's workplace. It's a reflection of the incivility increasing across the United States. And in the workplace, we have the capacity to say that is behavior that doesn't belong here. And I'm not going to go through these bullet by bullet, but I just wanted to make sure that I gave you some really real life examples to look at. And we need, of course, to help tell employees what to do if they observe or experience harassment. We want to tell them to speak up and object if they can, but we also want them reporting. Here are some things that I will advise you. It is never a good idea to require a written complaint. The reason for this is there is wide-ranging written literacy amongst the American workforce. And if you're going to have a written complaint and a written response, and you have somebody who's more or less educated or has English proficiency, you're going to end up with a very uneven playing field to evaluate the complaint. Number two, when people come forward with a fresh complaint, they usually have a lot of inaccuracies, omissions, magnifications, mistakes as to the chronology of events, because they are in a place where they are engaging in discussing what we might describe as a workplace trauma. And when that happens, folks are not organizing things to comply with our need to know. They're organizing things in ways to get us to understand and believe them. So when we ask them to write it down right away, we're not getting the best version of events. When we listen to them and we take notes, our notes constitute something just as valid as the complaint. The third reason I hear for written complaints is, well, they can always change their story. But wouldn't you want them to change their story if they realized that they'd been erroneous when they first told you things? It also places that employee and the employer immediately in an adversarial role. We don't believe you're telling the truth, and we're going to make you commit to a version of events to make you do that, rather than giving the employee the time and attention they need and worrying about getting something on paper a little bit later. It is also really important that when that employee first come forward, that the immediate response not be the who, what, where, and when. There is a time and a place for that. But the act of taking an employee complaint, and again, this is in the supervisor video, is an exercise in powerful, as somebody said, aggressive listening. Really seeking to understand, really showing them that you're paying attention, really communicating to them that they did the right thing by coming forward. And the facts will be there in an hour or a day, but the employee's feelings of fear and vulnerability may not, because if we don't get it right when they come forward, the first place they're going to go is, if you're not going to take me seriously, then I'm going to find someone to make you. And so we give them that belief that we are always going to take a complaint at face value at the beginning. There may be a time where that's not the case, but at that moment, that's what we need to do. And the other thing is, we need to create an expectation that if the behavior is happening, it will stop. And by the way, that's the only expectation we can conform with. We can't promise them that somebody's going to be fired. We can't promise them that everybody's going to like them tomorrow. We can promise them that if there's behavior happening that shouldn't, it will not continue. And then we also have to let people know that there's the expectation they'll cooperate with an investigation. I kind of alluded to that when we were talking about the request for confidentiality. And then most importantly, reinforce that if there is anything that they experience that they think is retaliation, they should bring that forward. Never promise them they won't be retaliated against, because we can't promise that. Retaliation can come from peers. It can come from all sorts of places, but really reinforce the importance of coming forward. So just a reminder, since I understand that most of the folks on this call are supervisors, that you must act on any report of misconduct. That doesn't mean that you personally have to resolve it. It does mean you're chosen They chose to tell you about their concerns. It is your job to do the best job of listening you can, and then make sure it gets into the hands of the appropriate person and document that you did this. This is critically important because when somebody says, I told my supervisor, I went to HR and nothing happened, you want to have contemporaneous documentation that said, in fact, something happened. This went through a process. You also need to monitor the environment to make sure that if the behavior is happening, it's not continuing, and never agree to keep an employee's report confidential. I want to thank everyone so much for your time, for your attention. I hope that you had some ahas and also got some things that you can make further use of in your role as leaders. So thank you.
Thanks. And real quick before we sign off, just want to, we're going to share the screen and show you the website that has all the other videos that Fran mentioned and has prepared for us. That is on the website. It's cawprespect.org.